Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first Audit Committee meeting of the Council year. The first item on the agenda is election of chairman. Are there any nominations, please?
Yeah, Mr. White.
Okay, do we have a seconder, please? Lovely. Are there any other nominations? Please, can we have a vote for chair, please? Philip White. Yeah, all in favour? Okay, can I ask Mr. White to come and take the chair, please?
First item on the agenda is the appointment of a vice chair for the committee. Do I have any nominations for that, please? Councillor Feekins.
Jim Higginson, please.
Are there any other nominations? Can I take a vote then in favour of Jim Higginson being vice chair? Sorry, I forgot to ask for seconds, sorry. Okay, we had the second from Councillor Smith, and we seem to have a vote in favour. Apologies for absence. What have we got?
Apologies from County Councillor Peter Clark.
Good. I'll just establish who's here today, apart from the council members of the committee. I see we've got Mr. Lewis from the Welsh Audit Office up there on the back row. And it's Mr. Jones, isn't it, next to him? Yeah. And down at the front, we've got Mr. Wilson from the Wales Audit Office. Anyone else in the body of the room that I needed to introduce? So if just the people on the top table, starting with Mr. Wathen, would just introduce themselves, please.
Good afternoon, Andrew Wathen, Chief Internal Auditor.
David Walton, Internal Audit Manager.
Peter Davis, Chief Officer for Resources.
Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services Officer.
Right, thank you, everyone. Declarations of interest are formally on the agenda, but I'm happy to take them as they arise. We've got, also on the agenda, we've got public open forum. I cannot see any members of the public present, so I'll move on. I'll move on to the action list from our last meeting. Okay, well, the first one was an item on performance management, which is down to Mr. Davis. I understand this is to do with staff reporting.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this concerns a performance management update that was received by the committee a couple of cycles ago. The specific action concerned an update being provided back into the Audit Committee and with regards to progress with annual staff appraisals. We've had, and I think I've reported this into the committee a couple of times now, some of the difficulties that we are having corporately in bringing some of the data together and to be able to determine and demonstrate the percentage of completion of annual appraisals. Most latterly, when I reported, we have introduced into our self-service module of our payroll system some functionality that allows managers to be able to actually record completion of staff appraisals. Unfortunately, we're still encountering some issues with this, and in terms of that module being fully used and utilised across the business. Some of the feedback that we've had from managers is the fact that, and this is the case if you give consideration to the diversity of our workforce in terms of blue collar, white collar mix, and the array of services that we deliver. There is no one standardised form of staff appraisal. So if you take, for example, a binman on the one hand versus maybe a manager on the other, the nature of their work is very different, and in fact the way that you perform annual appraisals and sort of regular contact is very different as well. So there are different methodologies in play, and what we've learned actually in introducing this module is that it doesn't actually lead to this module being wholly used, given the methods that are being deployed. So what we have gone and done is to actually now move across and into a position where we have a very well established service business planning process, as you'll all be aware. Contained within those business plans now is a requirement for managers to record completion of annual appraisals. So together with some conversations at both SLT, senior leadership team, and directorate management team level, in terms of reinforcing the need for every member of staff to receive an annual appraisal, we're looking to solidify that data through the service business planning process. So whilst I don't have a figure for you at this meeting, because I'm currently working with Richard Jones and his team, the improvement team at the moment, we will soon be looking to put ourselves in a position, the quarter one, so there is quarterly updates of business plans, and we would be looking to get into a position, certainly off the back of quarter one, in establishing a corporate picture. And clearly from that then, we will be able to look to take action and where we feel that there is maybe some areas of performance that need to be improved.
Thank you for that. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. I'm rather disappointed that we haven't had a more positive response. This was 3 months ago, March the 14th, when we raised this matter. If we continue waiting time and time again before we get a response, the responses are going to be negative, and as much as they were requested some months previously. So this is also referred to in the next item, I believe, this matter. But I am disappointed that we don't get responses back to the committee. 3 months is sufficient time, I would have thought, and I understand there are matters pending and working within the authority, within chief officers, but I would like to see at the next meeting that we get a real positive response.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. I accept the point on the one hand. I guess my counter to that is, I think, as I just touched on, we have, during the last financial year, introduced the module within my view, our self-service module within the payroll system. And it was hoped that that would have led us to a point where we would have had complete information to be able to report on. What's been concluded as a consequence, and for the reasons that I've outlined, that isn't the case. So I can't provide an accurate figure. If I was to provide a figure, it will be well short of 100%, as you'd imagine, and because of the incomplete nature of the data. So as I've said, we're moving across now into the service business planning process, and again, as touched on, I'd like to be in a position shortly off the back of quarter one with providing more accurate information.
Councillor Smith.
To follow Councillor Eason's comments, because I'm disappointed that we haven't made some progress on this issue. And I appreciate as well, as the officer said, there are many different roles for individuals working for Monmouthshire County Council, but they're all of value. And I also think that sometimes appraisals are regarded as a threat. They're not. They're important. They're important to establish people's self-esteem and value. So people shouldn't regard an appraisal as a threat. It's an opportunity to build empowerment with people. And so, like Councillor Eason, I hope we're going to see some figures, because it is very, very wrong that we've got so many employees that we don't really know how they're performing, whether they're happy, whether they're not. So best of luck, Peter.
If it does help in terms of giving a level of reassurance, certainly in terms of the conversation that has taken place both at senior leadership team and at directorate management teams, albeit anecdotal in terms of feedback from chief officers and heads of service, they are providing reassurances that appraisals are taking place and that staff are being regularly met with through the year. What we need to do is to actually convert that from anecdotal into actual information.
Well, just to enable me to sum up then, did you say that you were going to come back again on this maybe next time?
Yeah. Probably have a September meeting.
September meeting?
If there is a September. The one after the summer recess.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so that's the action carried on till September. Thank you. I'll move on then to the next item, as also for Mr. Davis, anti-bribery compliance. I know we had a presentation on this, so interesting to see what more there is to say.
Well, you'll be pleased to know this is a much shorter response. You're absolutely right. I recently presented to the committee in terms of anti-bribery compliance, and I confirmed within that presentation that I would be looking to come back and submit an annual risk assessment to the committee. I will be looking to do that at the next committee meeting, which I believe is in July.
Thank you for that. I'll move on then, if that's all right with people. We've got an item about the forward work plan, and as everyone will know, I am eager to make sure that the forward work plan is filled in as much as possible. And in fact, I was stopped by the chief executive only a couple of days ago and asked how the committee business was going. So it's a useful document. But I don't think there's anything to add on this particular point now. But I did want to just mention something else that was in the minutes of the last meeting about an IT risk register, which I think the committee was interested in. Do you have any information on that, please?
Again, you'll be pleased to know I might be going quiet after this one. I think there's other people contributing in. The situation here is that the risk assessment, which will be a composite risk assessment, is being brought together at the moment and being finalised in and alongside the Digital Programme Office's annual business plan. So I would be looking to get ourselves in a position, and again, if the committee were wanting to see sight of it, to be able to bring that back into the next audit committee meeting in July. It's in train, it's in development, and as you can imagine, there are numerous risk assessments needing to be brought together in and across the authority. We have systems administration functions and systems that are operated across the authority, and I guess the key risks from those need to be assessed. We're looking to aggregate those and bring the composite risk assessment back through to you as you need.
So just to summarise then, it is the composite risk assessment that you're going to bring to the committee, is that right? Right, thank you. I'll move on then to in the agenda, which is the Audit Committee's annual report for 2018-19, which I am presenting to this committee as a record of our business over the past year. It will be provided that we agree it today. It will be put on for the information of full council. I believe the particular value of this document is that it sets out that the business has been conducted and should provide reassurance as to the work of the committee. So I would just invite any comments and observations, please. Councillor Easton.
Yeah, thank you once again, Chair. Well, first of all, I'm pleased to see the officer attendance of these meetings is pretty good. But I'd just like for you to reaffirm 3.6, which I raised on the previous updates, which is the standard agenda item of the audit committee is where the officers are held to account, etc. I'd just like that reaffirmed from yourself as Chair that it's important that we get responses from officers in a timely fashion.
Well, I note that. I believe there are references in various places in the annual report to bringing officers to account and others to account and managers to account. So I hope that is a theme that runs through the report. Do I have any other comments or observations? Councillor Murphy.
Just to say that I was struck by how comprehensive it was, Chair, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Feakins, were you? Happy to move. You were going to move that we accept the report. Second from Jim. Just a comment from Mr. Councillor Easton at the back there. Oh, you're seconding. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll be putting the report up to council, and I shall be there to present it. I'll move on then. To Mr. Wathen's paper, the draft annual governance statement. Can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Chairman. This is the, as the Chairman says, the annual governance statement, and it's the draft version, so it's for comment by members this afternoon. It's also been circulated to key officers within the organisation, with the intention of pulling together a final version before it feeds into the statement of accounts in September. So, just as a bit of an overview, Chair, it's based on the 7 principles of good governance. And governance is about doing the right thing at the right time for the right people in the right way, and obviously in an open and transparent way. So this document and report sets out how the Monmouthshire Council completes its governance arrangements with some examples. It is quite a comprehensive document, and it feeds into the corporate plan and our priorities, and links in with the Public Service Board. It is quite a comprehensive document, Chair, so I don't intend to go through it in any detail, but I'm just quite happy to take any questions. There's just to give reassurance, it does take into account my own annual plan and the work that internal audit have been undertaken during 18-19. No major issues. We've addressed most of what was in the action plan from previous year, and there are things to follow up for 18-19 in 19-20. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
I'll throw it open for questions and observations then.
I thank you for your efforts, Mr. Waltham. You must have spent hours over it. I found it a very lengthy document to read, and in places I felt there was sort of repetition that it would be very good to see this document condensed if it's possible. It's very easy to sit here and criticise somebody's work, but I did feel going through that there were parts that I've read that somewhere else before, and I would subsume that into there and whatever. There was one specific question, though, that I would like to ask, and I don't know whether it's the right place or not, Chairman. In the executive summary and elsewhere as well, the comprehensive scrutiny service plan, evaluating the effectiveness of safeguarding. Monmouthshire has responsibility for the residents within Monmouthshire. It's a question that I've asked in other places, and I've been given the answer. We have various establishments located within Monmouthshire for the residential care of individuals run by independent authorities or other authorities. Care Standards in Wales hold the responsibility, I understand, for inspecting those premises. They actually lie within Monmouthshire, and I would like some accountability within Monmouthshire for those establishments. I'm not making myself very clear. We've got establishments caring for people within Monmouthshire that are not our responsibility, that are actually inspected, and the responsibility, I think, I'm being told, of Care Standards in Wales. I think as an authority, we need to know a little more about the standard of care within those establishments. There must be some way of us doing that, because we must all be aware of very, very unfortunate incidents that have occurred elsewhere. I wouldn't want to see Monmouthshire in the same light. It wouldn't be Monmouthshire's responsibility, but it's Monmouthshire, and as an elected member, I feel remote and responsible, because I am aware of a couple of establishments. I don't know what the standard of care is like there. I don't see any reports. I don't know if reports come back to this council. So within this governance thing, I feel there needs to be an element that takes account of that.
I can see where I can sympathise, in fact, with what you're saying and your general tenor. I think that there might be some issues here which go well beyond the audit committee, I'm afraid.
Go beyond here,
Yeah.
but it's a question I've asked before and always has come back the CSIW, but it's not satisfying this member.
I would just like to ask any officers present whether they are able to throw any light on this.
Okay, so let's start with the governance statement, and in the first instance, so the governance statement looks to provide levels of comfort and reassurance around the governance arrangements that we have in place for the services that we deliver directly, and in fact those that we commission. Okay. So our reach extends that far, whether that's through collaborations, partnerships, etc., etc. So, we need to ensure that there is, appropriate control environments around all such arrangements. But that is where the line gets drawn on that. If things are out of our control, then it's for other agencies to get the necessary level of comfort and reassurance around that, whether that's the Care Quality Commission or in its current guise or whatever. Where those, whether commission services or directly provisioned services are within our control, then you'd naturally expect that to be the role and remit of Adult Select or Children's Select, depending on the nature of it. But in this instance, and with the governance statement, we look to seek assurance that the control environment is in place and operating well, and that is the comfort that it is giving you.
I appreciate, Chairman, that these controls relate to the services that we are directly responsible for. My concern lies with services that are provided within Monmouthshire that are not our responsibility, but I have a concern to know the standards that are actually there. And perhaps in the governance it's got to be a direction that we have a closer working relationship with care standards. I don't know. I just have a concern, and I don't want to see any situation that reflects badly on this area and the area I represent.
If Councillor Smith wants to pursue this issue, how could she raise it?
She can certainly raise it up and through Adult Select Committee, and clearly they can take consideration of that matter.
I have raised, and it has been the same response. It is Care Standards in Wales' responsibility, which I accept, but...
Yeah, it is.
I appreciate you raising the question, but I understand what the formal line of inquiry would be, and I see that you've already done that. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Just one comment, and it's on page 13. It's regarding the scope of responsibility. And it is the fact that Monmouthshire County Council is responsible for ensuring that its business is conducted in accordance with the law and proper standards, and the public money is safeguarded and properly accounted for and used economically, efficiently and effectively. I'd like to consider that to be reaffirmed and strengthened, because there are areas where I believe that some monies are not being used economically, efficiently and effectively. But I'll just leave that as a comment. But the main concern I got is, a question, not rather a concern, is the internal audit team has a full complement of staff. And within that full complement of staff, you achieve 84% of your planned programme. And that's an annual, unvariable. It tends to be the same every year. So when you set your plan out for the year, do you set 110% of what you might want to do to get your 100%? Or, put another way, every year there'll be a rollover of 15 or 16%, which after the fourth year you'll have all backlog work to be done. So how do you balance your work to maintain this 84% and not leave work behind that it may be important? How do you tailor your staff to fit, which seems to be a regular annual 84 to 85%? It doesn't change much, but you've obviously got to have a work program which encompasses all your time. But are you Are you having an over expectation of what you intend to do, and how do you catch up with the backlog?
Over to you, Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. In terms of our planning process, we do plan internally within the team to achieve 100% of the plan. It's based on the resources we do have available in the team every year, and we do an assessment of the work that's expected of us that we need to undertake to give you assurance that the appropriate controls are in place, and then we have to balance that with the resources available. So that's our starting point. The target is set around about 80-82% because we know from previous experience we very rarely hit 100%, and that could be for a number of reasons. We could have overruns or issues on particular individual audit jobs. So if we're planning to take, for example, 20 days to undertake a particular audit, and there are complexities or issues which need to be resolved when we undertake that work, that could lead into maybe 25 or 30 days. So we're spending more time on individual audits than we originally planned. Also, there will be some audits that change during the year because we've got a fairly fluid risk profile, and we respond to heads of service and their changing priorities. So there could be some jobs which are in the plan at the beginning of the year, for whatever reason, are not in the plan maybe 6 months down the line. Sometimes they're replaced with other work within those service areas, sometimes they're not. Sometimes there are grant claims which we were expected to do in the previous year, so we therefore plan to do that work, and for whatever reason, an internal audit certification is not required in the year we do the actual work. So there are a number of factors why we don't always achieve 100% of the plan, but we put in like a contingency in terms of our target. In terms of anything that we don't cover, so if we've only covered 84% of the plan in 18-19, in our planning process then for 19-20, we'll make sure that everything we haven't covered is prioritised in 19-20, in amongst all the other risk assessment of work that we could possibly undertake.
So effectively, after 4 years, you'll be rolling into backlogs. I got no criticism of the audits you do. It's just that you seem to have a consistent 84%. Why not tailor things to suit you? You should get 100%. I'd like to see 100%. And since I've been in an audit committee in a number of years, I've never seen 100%. But you've always achieved this 80-85%, which means you're consistently good, but it could be look to be better if you could tailor your work to suit to get 100%.
Yeah, Councillor, one point that I'd like to add to that is as well, we've always got audits that are ongoing every time we get to the 31st of March. So if we plan that everything would be finished during March, we'd be sort of sitting there with, dead time and staff not engaged in ongoing activities. So we always have to plan right up to year end, and obviously with slippage, etc., some of those jobs will be completed into the April and the May of the following year. But those jobs invariably do get finished in due course.
Of course, the next agenda item is going to be the internal audit annual report, and then we can look at the performance of internal audit in that report. But as far as the idea of the work rolling over in increasing proportions goes, your actual starting target is to do about 85% of the jobs you've set out, is it not?
It is.
So you're actually achieving that target each year?
That's right, yeah. And that's based on previous experience, because we know it's fluid, it changes. If we had a set plan at the beginning of the year and nothing changed, then I would be putting 100% in. But we know from previous experience that just doesn't work. It's not an exact science, internal audit. We undertake the reviews on our best professional estimate of how long that particular work will take, but we don't know whether we're going to come across any issues until we actually get down there and do the operational work.
Councillor Murphy.
Just to add to that, Chair, I think it's worth mentioning the special investigations as well. There's 120 days planned for special investigations. You never know what's going to come along, so that will easily throw out your programme.
I'm sure Mr. Watson would agree. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other...
Sorry, Chief. If I just
Yep.
pick up Councillor- Sorry, I'm on? Yeah. If I could just pick up Councillor Smith's first comment about the length of the statement. Thanks for your comments. I agree. It is long, it's unwieldy. I think we need to try and improve that and try and make it more meaningful by making it sharper, a sharper document in future and a shorter document in future. But the reasons why some of it sounds as though it's repetitive are the principles lend itself to giving examples. So where we've got good practice in place, that might come in one or two or three places. So there is an element of repetition. I've tried to go through it and give different examples of the same good governance arrangements, but inevitably things will duplicate.
No, it's very easy to criticise. Do you want an R in, or do you wish to continue with steamed on in number 26? It's all right.
Well, you found a typo there. Oh, I'm sure we can... Mr. Watson will look at the typo. I'll just note then that the recommendation is that the committee contribute to the appropriateness and content of the draft AGS and that we endorse it. But just before I close it down, I will just say I did think that the report was a bit sharper than in previous drafts, previous years. And also, it's an advantage as a committee to see this now, because if you get it in a bundle with the annual accounts, then the thing you're looking at then is that much longer. So it's quite good to have a look at this now. So if everyone's, if we're happy with that, and we can record that the committee has endorsed the draft report. Thank you very much. I shall move on then to the next item, which is also for Mr. Wathen, I believe, which is the internal audit annual report, and we have a recommendation that we endorse the outturn report.
Thank you again, Chairman. This is one of the key reports I bring to Audit Committee's attention. It is the annual report for internal audit, based in two parts, really. First part is about the work we've undertaken, looking back 18-19, and the opinions we've issued, which gives me the information I need to give an overall opinion on the adequacy of the internal control arrangements, governance and risk management processes that are in place within Monmouthshire. So we do that in the first part of the report, and also it's my accountability to you as Audit Committee and the performance of my team. So the report is in two elements. So as an overview, we've undertaken 32 audit opinion work-related reports. The opinions range from substantial to limited, but the overall opinion is reasonable, so that there are adequate controls in place, although there are some risks which could compromise the overall control environment, and we do expect improvements to be made. There were 6 limited assurance reviews, and we'll come on to that in a moment. And overall, as Councillor has already mentioned, we achieved 84% of the 18-19 plan against an 82% target. So just to go into a bit of the detail, but without going into the report word for word, Chair, it's based on the fact that we do need to comply with the public sector internal audit standards, and I've brought that information to you previously to say that we are compliant with those standards, and that was externally assessed. That needs to be moved on to the 5-year cycle now, so that won't be coming back to Audit Committee for a number of years. And there's expectations within those standards for me to provide this annual report, provide an annual audit opinion, summary of the work we've undertaken, any concerns, make you as an Audit Committee aware of those, and comment on any compliance that the team has or non-compliance with the standards. I'm happy to say that we are compliant with the standards, and we've moved through an action plan which I can report back to you in due course. So this is the overall annual opinion which I mentioned. The opinion is there on paragraph 2.2, stating that it is a reasonable opinion. That's based on a number of reviews which we've undertaken, and I'll mention those briefly when we come to the appendix. There's a table set out in 2.4 comparing 3 years and the opinions which we've issued, and it seems to balance out over the years, and the opinion doesn't significantly change. As members will be aware, the last 3 years have resulted in a reasonable opinion. So when we undertake the work, the managers have got a responsibility to implementing our recommendations to ensure that there are improvements in the internal control environment moving forward to ensure sound stewardship of public money. In 4.3, that lists the limited assurances that we provided during the year, 18-19, and that information will be reported to Audit Committee separately on the 6-month update of the unfavourable audit opinions. So there'll be a bit more meat on the bone at future audit reports. We also cover non-audit duties, so we give financial advice, an element of training, and we are involved with control stationery. As has already been mentioned, we allocate some time in the plan for specialist investigations, and during 18-19, as per para 6.1, we undertook a range of special investigations covering those particular areas. Obviously, I can't go into the detail because they are confidential. We continue to support the team to maintain a professional setup and encourage the team to do CPD where appropriate. So moving on to performance, we achieved 84% of the agreed plan against a target of 80, so that's positive. We had 93 jobs in the plan. 78 were completed to at least draft report stage. We also get involved with the annual governance statement, which we've already talked about, National Fraud Initiative, some external work and some grant claims during the year. Getting work done on time is key for achieving that plan, and we achieved 64% of that compared to a lower figure in the previous year, 43%. And that helps get as much of the plan covered as possible. But as I said, that's not an exact science in terms of when we undertake work, if we come across any issues, they need to be addressed, as opposed to just leaving them in limbo. Reassuringly, 98% of our recommendations to operational managers were accepted. The trick of that performance indicator is to ensure that those recommendations, once agreed, have been implemented to demonstrate an improvement. And that information, again, will be reported back to Audit Committee in due course. I reported that back annually last year. Getting the reports out on a timely basis is also key. 8.6 shows that we issued final reports within 18 days of receiving the management comment, and draft reports were sent out within 9 days after completing the audit work. So there's room for improvement in terms of turning around final reports, but there's a justification for that, and it's a two-way street in terms of working with the operational managers. So if I just move to the Appendix A, that just outlines our opinions with a definition, which we use for all our audit reports. Appendix B lists all audit opinion work which we've undertaken, with the opinion on the right-hand side, and whether that report was in final or draft at the year end. And as members will see, it covers all services across the organisation. We then go on to Appendix C, which is the performance of the team. All I've tried to do is to give a year-on-year comparison along with the annual target for 18-19. So that sets it out quite neatly in terms of comparing our performance on a year-by-year basis. Obviously gives members the information of what happened in 2018-19. Appendix D just lists some of the non-opinion work which we get involved with, where we feel we're adding value to the organisation by making sure that things are in process, in place, before coming in and giving an unfavourable audit opinion. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, I'll throw that open for questions and observations. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, just a quick one, really, Chair. The percentage of recommendations made that were accepted was 98, which is far better than the anticipated 95. But can you give us an example of a reason why a manager wouldn't accept your recommendations? You know, surely they should accept them all. But you know, I just wondered if there was a reason why they wouldn't.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. In some circumstance, they may disagree with the risk attached to the weakness we've identified, and they are quite happy to manage that risk. So therefore, they don't feel as though a recommendation would support that. We would then put a supplementary comment in to say, well, actually, our audit comment is that there is a risk there, and it does need to be addressed. But occasionally, managers will say, well, I'll just manage that risk. There might be occasions where they say that will not be addressed until we get a new system on board. So I'm not accepting that recommendation. I appreciate what you're saying, but it won't change until we get a new system on board. Do you want to add anything, Dave?
Yeah, as Andrew says, it's normally a risk and return trade-off. If a manager feels that the resource involved in implementing a recommendation outweighs the benefit in the reduced risk, then they may choose not to accept the recommendation. If we still feel that it is a valid recommendation and worthy of inclusion, then we keep it in the report as an unaccepted recommendation, thereby demonstrating our opinion that it's still worthy of action.
And just to add to that, Chair, those discussions go on with operational managers, but if we flag that up and put an additional audit comment in, the final report does go to the head of service, so the head of service then has a view of why they haven't accepted the recommendations.
Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Chair. Most of the questions I had have been answered in the last item, and I think it was quite comprehensive. But I want to ask a question regarding, well, whatever you can tell me, but I don't know about the fraud, irregularity, and special work investigation, what you can say I don't know. But the one that struck me was conflict of interest and moonlighting. Well, I understand moonlighting to be having two jobs in effect, where one wouldn't conflict on the other. So it seems an odd word to use moonlighting in the terms, in the same line as conflict of interest. Conflict of interest would suggest to me that it may not be particularly moonlighting, but it might be an officer having two roles to play, one not within the council and one outside the council. It seems the wrong word, moonlighting. I think could be a bit stronger maybe on that. So I don't know what you can say about it, because you said it's under investigation, but conflict of interest suggests to me that it's quite serious.
Yes, Chair, I can't go into that particular issue in detail, but a conflict of interest could be, for example, an officer working for Monmouthshire, but in Monmouthshire's time undertaking private business. Moonlighting could be working for Monmouthshire, but working for somebody else at the same time.
Thank you for that. Are there any other comments and observations on the internal audit annual report? In which case, I'd just like to thank you for that report. I think it's a useful document for committee members to have. It lists out all the opinions in the year. And we'll be interested in the follow-ups on the limited assurances which you'll come up with in due course. We'll go on then to the we'll endorse that report, and we'll go on then to the also internal audit. Your final plan for 2019 and 20.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'll keep this one brief. This is the final audit plan for 1920. So you've had a report in looking back, 1819. This report looks forward to 1920 and is the final version of the report that came to you last time round. We issued a draft audit plan previously, which was discussed at the audit committee. This is the final version, so we've just tweaked it to make sure we've got the appropriate resources on board to undertake the work that we plan to do on a risk assessment. We've going to spend 908 operational audit days to cover as many service areas as we possibly can, and that information is now set out in the appendix in terms of the detailed jobs that we intend undertaking. There's nothing more to add on that, Chair, so I'll take any questions.
Over to the committee. Councillor Smith.
Just on the staffing one, the shared service between Newport and Monmouthshire, is it a 50-50 basis or 75-25?
Thank you, Chairman. The shared service is just me. I am the only bit of the shared service. Yeah. It was 60-40 in previous years, but for 1920 it's going to be 50-50.
Thank you for that. Well, if there are no further comments and observations, the recommendation was that we should review and approve the audit plan for 2019 to 20. Personally, I was pleased to see that the follow-ups recommended from item 9 have been included in the plan. If you want to put the two side by side, they match up. And I think the question I had has probably already been answered in discussion, which was whether the Chief Internal Auditor is confident of achieving the activities set down in the plan, or at least maintaining recent past performance. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As I said, we always aim to achieve 100% of our plan, but inevitably things come across our path during the year which prevent us from doing that. And experience has told us that. That's why we set the target at the 80% level. As we speak at the moment, we are on track to achieve 100% of the plan, but things could change. Risk profile changes. We could get a number of special investigations which are time consuming and then will impact on our resources to undertake the actual planned work. But I'll be reporting back to Audit Committee on a quarterly basis so I can keep you informed.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll minute that the committee has reviewed and approved the plan. I'll go on then to the next agenda item, which is the Wales Audit Office Certificate of Compliance for the Audit of Monmouthshire County Council's 2019-20 Improvement Plan. This will be for Mr. Wilson, I believe, of the Wales Audit Office to introduce. Could you just give us a little bit of background about why we've got this certificate now?
Good work. Okay, so under the local government measure, the council is required to set out its improvement priorities for the coming year. And then there's a report comes through later in the year, which is the assessment of performance, which is how the council then reports on how it's performed on those improvement on the previous year's improvement objectives. They have to be out of sync because of the timing of the years. So the council has now got its corporate plan, which is over a few-year period. So you've stated what your priorities are. And you went to council earlier this year to reaffirm those priorities. So we are required to issue a compliance certificate or to assess whether you've complied or not. And if you have, we issue the compliance certificate. So the fact that you've got a certificate means that we consider that you've met your obligations under the measure. So there's nothing more to be said, really, Chairman.
Do we have anything from MMC officers about this, Mr. Jones?
Working. Just to really welcome the certificate and as Dave describes, the prime reason it's been issued.
Okay then, well I think this is a certificate for this committee to note. If there's any more questions or observations, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'd just like to thank Mr. Wilson for introducing the paper, and I'll move on. Next item on the agenda, the Service User Perspective Review, Customer Contact and Manager's Response. Now, I believe that Mr. Wilson is going to introduce this for us, so I'll hand over to him.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. A few things to say about the presentation. I'm going to go through every slide, but I think it's important to note that the service user perspective work is something that we've carried out across all 22 councils this year, last year. And the intention was that we would look at it at a topic from the service user's own perspective. So this has been different to the way we would normally carry out the work. We agreed with Monmouthshire that we would look at customer contact arrangements. The questions that we sought to answer are listed on slide 2, and slide 3 shows the focus that we've had, and that is that we've looked at the community hubs as a key vehicle for members of the public engaging with the council, the My Monmouthshire app, and the compliments, comments and complaints procedure. So those are the 3 areas, and you'll see in the presentation that we tried to colour code so we don't get too confused as we work our way through. So we've colour coded the 3 subject areas that we've looked at. Slide 7 shows the conclusions that we reached throughout it. So I'll just take you through those. So overall, we found that citizens are mostly satisfied with the access and quality of customer contact arrangements, but the council could do more to take users' needs into account in their design and effectiveness. So what do we mean by that? If we look at the 3 areas, first of all, we felt that local people are mostly happy with the ease of contacting the council, although there are ways that access could be improved. So what we found around there was that in terms of the hubs, there was really positive feedback. The My Monmouthshire app, there's been good take-up so far. It's still fairly new, so you're still building on that yet. That was quite positive, as we detailed in the presentation. And the compliments, comments and complaints process is clearly set out. So the arrangements are there for people to use. What we mean about the improvements to access that could be made, this reflects some of the feedback that we had. In terms of the hubs, there were references to the opening times of the hubs. In terms of the My Monmouthshire app, I've included a couple of comments around the app. But I think it's important to reference there that with technology, some people will like it, some people won't. So some of the feedback we got was that a couple of people found it difficult to use, but there's no way we indicating that that's representative of everybody. And then the compliments, comments and complaints, you'll see on slide 14 that some people found finding the right person to contact was difficult. So when we say about there are improvements to access that you could make, they're the sorts of things that we're referring to. Next, we move on to where we found that service users are mostly satisfied with the quality of the service that they receive at the hubs, but are less satisfied with the council's handling of complaints. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you look at slides 16 and 17, this is really positive feedback from members of the public about the hubs. In terms of complaints, there were some concerns about the service user perception of how their complaint was handled. Now, when we set out with this piece of work, we did have discussions about whether people might be swayed by the outcome of their complaint in the way that they responded to us about the process. And we did go to great lengths to try to make it very clear that we were dealing with the process, so the outcome was irrelevant for our work. So some people may have responded because they weren't happy with the outcome. But I think whatever, there are important messages in here that the council needs to take into account, because just because somebody was unhappy with the outcome doesn't mean that what they're saying about the process isn't right. So that's what we found about the number 2. And then the third one, we found that the council has arrangements in place to engage with local residents, but this does not always result in effective two-way communication or lead to changes in contact arrangements that better meet users' needs. So what do we mean by that? Well, there were some concerns raised by complainants about engagement. There were some references by hub users who had identified opportunities for improvement, but felt that these hadn't been acted upon. And there are opportunities for the council to proactively seek feedback. There are current arrangements for people to give feedback. There are feedback forms available where people can provide those, and there are arrangements to do it. What we're referring to here is the council proactively going out and seeking feedback on service users' experiences. So they're the conclusions that we've reached. On slides 29 and 30, we've listed some proposals for improvement that the council we feel that the council should address. So that's all I've got to say, unless there's, I don't know, Chairman, how you want to deal with it. Do you want the management response next, or questions?
With this kind of paper, I usually ask for MCC officers to provide a response to the WAO presentation. I'm not sure who is going to do that today, but I see we've got. Is it going to be Mr. Gatehouse? Yes. Just introduce yourself as well as telling us about the management response.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance. If you're content, Chair, I'll begin this, but it might be that Tracy Howie and Annette Evans also come in, because this is a sort of multifaceted piece of work and touches upon sort of different areas of responsibility. For those not aware, my areas of responsibility in this would be the community hubs and the responsibility for the My Council Services app. So my sort of responses will major in on those areas. But as always, we're always welcoming to these reports. It's great to have an external perspective on some of the work that we're doing. As always, working with Wales Audit Office, the work was sort of carried out in an engaging way. We were involved from the outset in terms of development of the brief, and we always welcome the report findings and opportunity to learn from both the views of Wales Audit Office and the views they garner from customers. I think it's highlighted some important points for us. I think certainly as I looked at sort of some of the areas of customer service for which I'm responsible, I think we recognise the need to bring the learning from some of these different channels into one place. As an example, Annette produces an incredibly robust and useful report on the complaints process, which comes to audit committee every year. If I reflect on whether I can make more use of that in terms of the messages from that for the hubs, and put that alongside the data and information I get directly from those services, I think the answer is certainly yes. When we have these sources of information, we have to make most use of them. I think, sort of broadly speaking, a lot of the feedback that is received from customers, we try to make use of. So I know, for example, some of the specific feedback that came through when Wales Audit Office were out in the hubs. I believe there was something raised about the quality of toilets in one of the hubs, which has now been added to the planned maintenance programme. It's an issue that was raised once or twice. When it started to be raised 3 or 4 times, then we start to think, yes, we've got a problem here. So the importance of this feedback is really important to us. So I guess in short, and Chair, with your sort of permission, if after sort of feedback from anything that Tracy may wish to feed in, I'm just then happy to take questions in response to any specific issues.
You got? Do we have a further contribution as part of the management response, please?
Yes, we do, Chair. Annette's going to comment.
Yeah. Well, I'm the.
If you could introduce yourself, Annette.
I'm Annette Evans. I'm the Customer Relations Manager, and I'm responsible for complaints and dealing with the complaints in the authority. Just wanted to give a little bit of context, really, to this, because for the period they looked at 2017-18, and we had 89 complaints in that time. they looked at 70, I think it was 77 complaints because 10 were ongoing. Excuse me. And the WAO spoke to 24 complainants. So I feel that is a small number of complainants that they spoke to. 12 of those complaints weren't satisfied, and 12 complainants partly satisfied or satisfied. So, you know, we have to look at it in that context as well. Out of those 24 complaints, 8 of them were complaints that were dealt with at stage 1 of the process, and 16 were stage 2 complaints. With regards to the timescales, when I looked at our records, the stage 1 complaints were all dealt with within the timescales. So again, it's, you know, it's users, their perspectives really on how we deal with complaints, and we do respect, you know, their views about it. The stage 2 complaints, there were 7 that went over the 30 working days. So, you know, I acknowledge that. With regard to contacting complainants, we do aim to contact them within 5 working days. But the investigations don't start until we agree the complaint with the complainant and what they're looking for as an outcome. So again, you know, there may be some misinterpretation around that, and we'll have to do something about that to make that a bit more clearer. The investigators, they have 20 working days to investigate their complaint, and then the head of service has 10 working days to respond to that complaint. Both at stage 1 and stage 2, the letter that goes out says that if they're not satisfied, well, they can come back to us. At stage 1, they can go on to stage 2 complaint, and stage 2, they can go to the Ombudsman. So they have got the opportunity to express if they are not satisfied with their complaint. What we will do in future, perhaps, is to have some form of user feedback form of some description that we can send out both at stage 1 and stage 2 about how they felt the process was carried out. And as our colleague down there said from the WAO, I personally feel in my experience that people don't differentiate between the process and the outcome. When I looked at the stage 2 complaints for that period, the majority were not upheld, so they're not going to be satisfied with the outcome of their complaint. With regard to our complaints and compliments policy, we are due to review that, so we will have a look at whether there needs to be anything that needs to be reviewed. But we do follow the Ombudsman's model that he has asked all local authorities in Wales to use. So we all use that, and it is a standard format. So, you know, yes, I take on board what's said, and we will do our best to try and get more feedback from users about the process. But I think we have to bear in mind the context. You know, there was only 24 complainants that were contacted, and like I said, the timescales for stage 1, our records indicate that they were dealt with in the 10 working days, and stage 2 complaints, they weren't upheld, so they will be dissatisfied. So I just wanted just to say that, really.
I just wonder whether the management team want to just talk to the recommendations as to the actions you're going to take. I believe these. I found this actually quite difficult to see where these recommendations were coming from the slide presentation, but I understand that they were agreed between the Welsh Audit Office and the authority, and so we've got the authority's responses to the recommendations. I just wonder whether anyone could take us through those.
Yeah, I'll pick up some of those. Apologies, Chair. I'm just scrolling to the right page of the report.
Just to give it context, I'm sure David will chip in if needs be. The management response is a set format that Wales Audit Office provide us with in order to respond to reports. So the proposals identified in the proposal for improvement column are those lifted directly from the concluding slides of the report in front of you today. So hopefully members can see how they line up in terms of how we responded. And in terms of formulating the management response, we try and take account of the evidence that's come out throughout the report, consider that within the context in which it's provided, and then look at our arrangements to see what's the appropriate action to take, whether that be tweaking or amending existing arrangements or looking at where we can include new or amendments to those processes. And I think reflecting on some of the proposals in the report, we talk about how we can strengthen some of our arrangements, how we can amend things or improve things. So some of the action very much is in the how can we tweak our existing processes, taking on board feedback from service users that's provided. And hopefully that comes across in terms of the way we structured the actions.
Okay, I'm going to throw it open now to questions and observations from the members of the committee. So, Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. This report, in terms of the numbers, basically had 400 people who made comments during the year, finished up with 77 complainants, 10 of which were still, you couldn't speak to because there was 87 actual complaints. From that lot, only 2 progressed to local government ombudsman of the 77. How many of the other 10 which were in process, did any of those finish up with the local government ombudsman? Because you finished up being only 24 people were allowed or were available to speak to the Wales Audit Office, which is a low number. If you take 2 of the 24 going to ombudsman, that's how you figure. But if you take 2 out of 90, it's a lesser percentage. So statistically, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me in terms of where you finished up. But I see recommendations. The recommendations are quite clear. But where do you see the ones which go to the local government ombudsman? Is it a higher figure than last year, a lower figure? And was that the total number that went to local government ombudsman, or were there more? Really
can I just point out that the all authority complaints report is presented to the committee, and that's where we discuss the performance this year against last year and so on and so forth. I hate to shut down any comment at all from members of the committee, but I think we probably don't want to go back to where we were looking again at the all authority complaints report. I think what we're talking about now is really the recommendations from the Welsh Audit Office and the response that we've made to it, that the office that the authority has made to it. But having said that, Councillor Eason, I'm not trying to stop you asking a question at all.
I can answer that, actually, to say that the Ombudsman hasn't investigated any of the complaints that have gone to them for that period.
Councillor Feekins wants to get in. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I think it is important to understand this in context, because obviously if someone has had a bad experience and you ask that person, human nature is going to drive that person to give you an opinion that it's been a negative experience because they've had a negative outcome. And I think it's very difficult, going back into the officer's view, that it's difficult for any complainant to split or differentiate between process and outcome. And I think that's difficult to probably address in this report, but I think it should be addressed in the report, because I think there has to be a weighting. It has to be weighted that if someone has had a negative outcome, I think we need to understand the outcome, because I think if someone has had a negative outcome and they are also the same people that are saying this has been a bad experience, then I think we have to understand that in balance is probably not, it's not just simply looking at the figures. There has to be a balancing element to that, a sort of a realignment, if you like, of the outcome of the actual figures. And also the other thing I think is important, and notwithstanding your last comment about us understanding complaints and the difference between a complaint, i.e. for me, a breakdown of service delivery is a complaint versus a gripe. You know, something's shut when they thought it was going to be open, and that's a gripe, and it's not happening. And the other thing would be to make sure that we're not picking up multiple complaints, one person making multiple complaints about the same thing or maybe similar things. So there's several bits more information that would probably allow this to be a fuller report to us. I understand there was limited time, limited resources, everything else. But I think that some of that information added into this would help us greatly. And obviously, the My Monmouthshire app moving forward is going to be hopefully a game changer for us. And that's only just sort of bedding in. So you know, not to pick any holes into this at the moment, but definitely the weighting element for that. I don't know how you'd come to that conclusion or that outcome, but I think some reference back to this should be pointed out for that.
Mr. Wilson, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, certainly. I accept your point that about the 24 being a low number, but I can't tell you the amount of effort that we went to try to get to everybody. We started off this piece of work wanting to look at everybody who complained, commented or complimented the council, which was several hundred. However, when we get to the stage of trying to differentiate between people who've commented and people who've complimented the council, we were advised not to contact those people because they probably wouldn't know they were in a system. So for us to then go back and speak to them then would have just caused confusion. So we came down to the 89 people who were on the complaints, who'd made complaints. There were, as Annette said, there were 10 people who either the complaint was ongoing or it was felt that it would open fresh wounds that wouldn't be helpful within the review, so we excluded those people. We were going to send a SNAP survey out to people, but then the response rate that you normally get from SNAP survey, a good response was 25%, so we decided that would just make the number even less. So we wrote to all the people concerned, all 77, inviting them to get involved with us in the review. And we telephoned people to try to get through to them. So the response rate, whilst 24 is a small number, it's actually a pretty good number when you come back to the efforts that we put in to actually get it. The low number is nothing to do with our resources. The low number is the people who wanted to engage with the review. And whilst it's a low number, I come back to what I said earlier, which is that just because people weren't happy with the outcome and may have given negative comments, that doesn't mean that those negative comments aren't quite right. So they are perfectly valid, and they're perfectly valid for the council to take into account when it reviews its complaints processes. So I take the point, but you have to understand that you know, it could still be a perfectly valid point that people have made.
Do you want to come in again?
Only thank you very much for allowing me to come back again, and I appreciate the points you just made, and I understand the difficulty in trying to this exercise. You know, the gambit for itself was such a difficult position to take in the first instance. You know, it's difficult information to go and get. I wonder if we was to offer every complainant £10 at the end of their process, what the outcome would deliver, whether they would be positive or negative at the end of that. That as an interesting throwaway comment, but you know, but I think, but it's. I understand where and the difficulties that you will always find in trying to get this information from people who have made complaints. But I also understand the points that we could help to improve the services of the complainant.
Councillor Murphy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a point about people trying to access information, really. Obviously, this is a historical report, and we always have this problem, don't we? Because this authority is always moving on. And you looked at community hubs, My Monmouthshire app, and whatever. Because we've developed this chatbot now, Monty, that people are using increasingly. I saw one item this morning, late in the evening. Some lady must have wanted to know what that was for school dinner the following day, so she typed it in, and it responded, given the menu for the following day. So if people are going to increasingly use that, an awful lot of information that they currently, or back at the time this report was written, wasn't necessarily that available to them, is instantly available now. So hopefully that will reduce the amount of people saying that they can't get that information. But of course, they've got to use it first. But you can get it on Facebook or on the website, so it's easy enough to get hold of.
Thank you for that. Councillor Woodhouse, please.
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, are you in a position to be able to tell us how we compare with other authorities, or indeed this sort of survey, has this been carried out with Monmouthshire previously, and have we got any sort of comparison with that?
No, is the simple answer. I explained at the start of the introduction that we've discussed with the 22 councils the area of focus for their particular reviews. I'm not aware that we've carried this particular review out in any other council, so I don't have comparative information. I think the important thing about this is that your own compliments, comments and complaints report gives you factual information back. But I think what this report adds is a service user perspective to that. So whilst Annette can say about the timescales from her records, the feedback from the users was that they didn't feel it was dealt with in a reasonable time. And I think the challenge to the council then is to try to square that. Well, how do they understand? The only way they'll understand that is speaking to service users.
I think that's a very good point, really, to arrive at. But yes, Councillor Woodhouse.
Just a sort of an observation, really. Obviously, from speaking to members of the public, and we obviously as local members get, a huge amount of information from our constituents. That time is the key. It is all about the time, how long it takes to resolve a complaint, because a complaint just escalates if it's not dealt with in a timely fashion, and that is very, very important. And I think we can save a lot of time and resources if we can deal with complaints quickly and promptly.
Mr. Wilson, do you believe that the management response to the four issues raised is contributing to the process?
To be fair, Chairman, we don't assess the management response when we receive it. We do our proposals for improvement. The council responds. The time that we would do anything else is if we did a follow-up piece of work to this at some later stage. So we don't have a comment on what the council's put in response. The challenge back is whether it'll make a difference and whether it'll deliver the proposals for improvement. But at this stage, I haven't done any work on that, so I'm not in a position to comment.
So it's a matter of looking at the future position and looking back on whether it's changed between now and then.
Well, as an audit committee, you may very well want to ask for a report in the future on whether those proposals for improvement have brought about, the actions have brought about the improvement that we've asked for.
Usually these things do come back to the committee, don't they, Mr. Jones? That's probably what you were going to say.
Just to confirm, Chair, you'd be familiar that we do roughly a 6-monthly report to the committee which captures all our proposals for improvement from Wales Audit Office that remain open and the progress we've made against the actions that we proposed in the management response to address those. So in the next report that will come forward to you, we'll obviously now include these proposals on management response and then our assessment of the progress we've made against them.
Well, I thought that was a very interesting contribution to the work of the committee. The difference in the performance figures in the Authority Complaints Report and the subjective reviews of complainants, and I'm sure officers and others will be taking that into account in future policy. If there's any other comments or observations, I'll take them now. Otherwise, I'll just say that I believe it was for the committee to note the report and make recommendations and comments, and I think we've done that. So we'll move on then. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the well-being of future generations, an examination of developing a range of options to improve rural transport, again with a management response. This is also for you, Mr. Wilson, is it?
It is.
And I will be asking for a response from officers after your introduction.
That's helpful, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I started last time saying that the service user perspective was a different piece of work, and this again is a different piece of work to what we would normally do. You'll be familiar with the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. It's fairly new. So this piece of work was an examination of the progress that the Council is making in delivering taking account of the Sustainable Development Principle in the way that it's developing its step. The step that was chosen was improved rural transport. So that's one of the areas that you've said that you want to improve in helping to deliver your improvement priorities. So we recognise that the work is that it's new, and we also recognise that you wouldn't have completed it because it's an improvement priority you're working on at the moment. So we're not saying you should have done everything. In terms of delivering this piece of work, we've used a facilitative approach. We held a workshop. Well, the first piece of work was the council prepared a narrative around the progress, why they were doing the work around rural transport and what you were actually doing. We then held a workshop with a range of managers and some external stakeholders to look at the 5 ways of working and to consider the progress that you've made to date with it. Then we had a few interviews to try and put some flesh on the bones from what we'd been told, and then we held a second workshop, which was an action planning workshop, where we looked at what we'd found. We looked against the 5 ways of working and opportunities there were to maybe do things differently, but also to recognise the improvements that you'd made already. So, in terms of a management response, Chairman, there is no management response to it. The management response is in the report, and it's in section 2 of the report, which is the council's response. So at the workshop, the second workshop that we held, we went through the potential actions that the council could take to further address the 5 ways of working, and we've included those in the report. So there's no separate management response to this. The report includes the strengths that we found against each of the 5 ways of working, and it includes the areas for development as well. If we look to the contents page, you'll see the conclusions there that we've reached. So overall, we felt that the council has acted in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle in setting the steps to develop a range of options to improve rural transport, but there are opportunities to further embed the 5 ways of working. So what did we mean about those specifically? If we look at long term, first of all, we felt that the council is in an early stage of understanding long-term needs and solutions. In terms of prevention, we found that the council has identified some of the problems caused by the lack of rural transport, but has not yet identified potential solutions. So you know what the problem is, but you've not identified the solutions yet. In terms of integration, we found that the council is committed to integrated solutions, but rural transport is not well recognised within council and partner plans. So we were looking at how the various plans fitted together to support you in the delivery of this. In terms of collaboration, the council started to collaborate in the planning and scoping of some solutions and would benefit from engaging with more partners to identify root causes and additional sustainable solutions. And then finally, in terms of involvement, we felt that whilst there are positive examples of stakeholder involvement, and there are definitely positive examples, the council could benefit from involving the public at an earlier stage and producing comprehensive equality impact assessments for all policy decisions on major service changes. So that's what we found by using the rural transport as a tracer for how you're doing with the 5 ways of working. Now, within the report, we identify, we say in there that what we were looking for against each of these, and then the strengths and the areas for development. So at this stage, I have to confess that paragraph 19, there's a mistake in it, because included in paragraph 19 are the same what we were looking for, but it's the prevention, not the integration. So collaboration. Yeah. So what it should have said was, we looked for evidence of how this step could contribute to the 7 national wellbeing goals, how delivery of this step will impact on the council's wellbeing objectives and wider priorities, and how delivery of this step will impact on other public bodies' wellbeing objectives. So that's just a correction for you, just to flag that up where we are at the moment. So that's where we are. That's the position as we found it, along with you at the time. We've been very careful with this piece of work to keep the ownership with the council, and I'm sure Matt or Richard will agree with that in a few minutes. So you started with your narrative, and we've built on that narrative with you. There's nothing in here that you don't agree with as a council. The only last thing to say from me is that there's several references to GovTech within the report. So I just want to explain what GovTech is. And I'm sure that Matt will explain it better than I in a few minutes. But from our perspective, GovTech supports public sector organisations to find innovative solutions to operational services and policy delivery challenges. It helps identify and work with cutting-edge technology firms. So reference in the report relates to the Council's participation in the opportunity to identify potential solutions around rural transport. And I'm sure Matt probably wants to say more than that. Well, we have to stop him because he can talk for a long time on this. Chair, can I hand it over?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I'm still want to be very interested to know if officers have a contribution to make at this stage following from that presentation. So is Mr. Gatehouse, is it you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And as David has said, there's no sort of formal management response such as you usually get with this. And it was a very interesting piece of work for us because, as has been rightly identified, we're dealing with complex challenges. You know, our corporate plan covers a number of issues, some of which are more operational, some of which are addressing those really complex societal challenges. And this was one of those issues that came through the wellbeing assessment that the Public Service Board carried out a number of years ago. I think all members in this room will recognise that the difficulty of providing good quality public transport in a rural area like Monmouthshire, and recognising actually that sometimes the solution to that is not always transport itself. It's about the need for people to access services, the problem caused by a lack of transport in terms of people becoming isolated and lonely. And I appreciate that Dave mentioned that actually, in terms of that feedback, Wales Audit Office weren't looking for complete solutions at this stage. We're at a relatively early stage of a journey, trying to identify solutions which we can effectively look in globally at what works out there and trying to work with some of the best technology providers, putting ideas forward as to those sort of cutting edge ideas that could work in a Monmouthshire context. So we were really fortunate to be successful in the bid to this GovTech scheme. And I think the other aspect to this report is, aside from the specifics of rural transport and GovTech, is the wider learning, because this was a tracer about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I think it's important for us as well to look at the specifics of the GovTech project, to actually understand some of the lessons that came out through this for other areas of working in complex areas, and some of the challenges we have. So, for example, early production of the Wellbeing of Future Generations and the impact assessments in all of these complex challenges, to ensure that actually where there are impacts on different stakeholder groups, be they older people from different communities, that we assess that at the outset of projects. And that's one of the things we look to do here. And actually, we were very lucky working with the firms from the GovTech that actually they took a very thorough approach to identifying different segments of our community and spending an awful lot of time in Monmouthshire, embedding themselves within communities, going out riding the grassroots buses for 2 or 3 days at a time, going out with community meal drivers and actually meeting and knocking on the doors of people that sometimes don't get out of their houses to understand what the barriers were for them accessing services. So for us, I think this sort of whole experience of GovTech, but also this learning experience has been really useful in terms of the Future Generations Act. Notwithstanding that, we'll say it's a big challenge. You know, we're looking at a piece of work. I think, Dave, from memory, it was November, wasn't it? I think we did the first workshop. At that point, you know, these GovTech schemes, actually we'd selected them, but they weren't kicking off until December. So I think we'd met the suppliers, we've had some initial setups meetings, but at the point of the first workshop, we hadn't really had an awful lot of delivery. But I think that's the nature of dealing with complex challenges. They're not necessarily solved overnight. It's hard in an early stage to pin down measurables, but as important as that, or perhaps not quite as important as the measurables and the outcome, the way in which we approach this. And I think sort of the report and the structure of the report is very helpful in that context. But probably enough from me, Chair, and you know, with your permission, over to sort of any questions or observations.
Absolutely. I'll throw it open to the meeting now to ask any questions or make any comments they wish. Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned in your report that the Council received a £3.5 million Welsh Government grant earmarked for spending by March 2019. That's correct, 2019, is it?
I believe so, but Matt might want to comment.
That's my understanding. That's not in my specific area of responsibility, but yeah, that was funding received last year, I think, from Welsh Government.
So you spent £317,000 on grassroots bus service, and during that year, you didn't, as you've noted, you didn't involve the Strategic Transport Group. Yet £3 million has been spent. Can you tell me where that £3 million has gone? That was for active travel and transport and infrastructure projects. Where have we spent £3 million in the last year on that sort of stuff?
I'm not familiar with the detail of all of that, Grant, because although that's mentioned in this report, it's not part of the specific scope of this. My understanding is in the region of £300,000 to £400,000 of that money has been invested in new and replacement grassroots bus vehicles. There is funding in there for active travel.
Or just it says spending by March 2019. It says it's been spent. I'm concerned that the £3 million has been spent, and as a member, I don't know where that £3 million came from or has been spent. And I'm a member of the Strategic Transport Group as well, and it says, yes, quite clearly, the Strategic Transport Group weren't involved in anything to do with this idea. So I just wondering where the £3 million has gone. I don't see across Monmouthshire any improvements to the infrastructure and transport areas. So I'm a bit concerned about that £3 million.
You've caught me out a little bit here,
Could we have a report
Could
somewhere?
you tell me which paragraph these numbers are in?
If you go to page 111, you've got, page 107. The Council received a £3.5 million Welsh Government grant earmarked for spending by March 2019, which suggests it's been spent. 317,000 was allocated to buy new vehicles for the grassroots service, quite clear. So there's just over £3 million remainder of the funding is for active travel and transport and infrastructure projects. If it's going to be spent by March 2019, where's it been spent?
I agree the date looks odd. Could we make an inquiry through resources about that, please, and let us know in future? Thank you.
I think the report obviously covers a lot of detail around the activity that's going on in relation to that step for rural transport, and I think in this instance it's probably referring back to those colleagues and getting a response back to you around that point you raised, Councillor Easton, just for clarity.
Right on.
Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to add, you know, it's best to do a written response on this, or at least bring it to the next meeting. But just for background information, this has all just landed in my portfolio, and I've got a meeting with chief officers on the 25th of this month to kick off the remainder of the investigation into what we're going to do. So no doubt we can make some progress and at least understand what's been going on. But I think as regards Councillor Eason's question, I'm sure that we can come up with a written answer to that.
Yep, thank you very much. Mr. Gatehouse.
Yeah, I did just want to add in terms of that, the point about strategic transport group not being involved is not about not being involved in the 3.5 million. It's not being involved specifically in the GovTech project. So just to be clear, I would think strategic transport group in terms of the other funding has been involved. I don't know the detail of that, but specifically in terms of the Wales Audit Office report, they weren't involved in the GovTech element of this. So just to be clear on that.
Thank you for that information. It's still open for questions and observations from anyone. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, only one comment that's there, which is positive examples of stakeholder involvement. The council would benefit from involving the public at an earlier stage and producing a comprehensive equality impact assessment. Absolutely agree that public need to have a whole lot more input into this transport issue. I'm very, very aware of how important it is and the social implications of not being able to get out. Could save us a lot of money if we resolve this problem. So, yes, I don't know how the council's going to get greater involvement, because when you look at the numbers of people who were involved in consultations on the previous report, compared with a population of over 80,000, it's minimal. It doesn't really reflect at all, I feel, on a lot of the views that I get. So I hope we make progress in the future, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I'm sure there are many councillors here who are much closer to these issues than me. Yes, I'll take another question or observation.
Thank you. So I'd just like to ask a question about how we actually are going to go through the areas of improvement. So in particular, it's been discussed at the PSB board, but there's not any meaningful collaboration yet. The council's unclear about the willingness of partners to collaborate. So what are we actually going to do to make the improvements? They've been highlighted that there's actually areas which need to be improved, and it seems to be an awful lot about who we're going to be working with to try and find ways forward. So what are the proposals that we're actually going to do about that?
Sounds like a question for officers, unless Mr. Wilson wants to contribute.
Yeah, I think that there's quite a bit in that question, and if we look at some aspects of that, one of the comments of this report were rural transport isn't adequately referenced, or this project isn't referenced in the plans of other partners. You know, actually, as it's constructed here, this is an objective of Monmouthshire County Council. It's important that we do work with other partners, because our residents will use the services of a multiplicity of organisations. So to give one example of how that's happening, one of the schemes working, or one of the companies, I should say, working with us on the GovTech project, has liaised for Transport for Wales, has liaised with Welsh Ambulance Trust, has obtained all of the data in confidentially sourced transport data showing the movements of non-emergency health transport throughout Monmouthshire. They've used that to identify what other solutions could help people access health services, putting them in greater control. So what are the gaps that are currently being met by statutory services that could be provided in other ways? They've used that alongside other data, such as search information for train and bus providers, to get a picture as best they can for the true demand of transport in the area. Now, if that were to become an effective solution, and they were to use that data, bring new supplies into the market, that has real benefits for colleagues in health, particularly the Welsh Ambulance Service. Now, whether the Welsh Ambulance Service then choose to incorporate that into their own business plans is a matter for the Welsh Ambulance Service, not for a matter of Monmouthshire County Council. But to the extent to which there are collaborative opportunities emerging here, if we didn't feel we were getting traction with the partners we needed to progress them, we have the vehicle in the first instance of the Public Service Board to take that forward. So if we were getting blockages or had issues with partners where we felt this was limiting our ability to progress these issues, we have the potential through the PSB to unlock them. Right now, these transport providers have had the interaction they've needed with, for example, health, to get the data they need to conduct the research and develop the prototype problems. So, you know, my honest answer to that is at this stage, that as an example, that hasn't presented us with a problem. When you're dealing with complex issues like this, and they're multifaceted, there are problems and blocks almost at every turn. And we can't necessarily foresee every one of those, but we work closely with these providers to try and unblock them as and when they arise. And what I would sort of add in terms of when we will see outcomes from this, I'm just pausing for a moment because I'm just... We're working with the UK government, and I have to ensure that the next phase I talk about isn't sort of getting beyond myself in terms of the detail we can talk about. So, Chair, apologies. I shall just stop at that point and perhaps give more information at a future committee.
Mr. Wilson wants to make a contribution.
Yes, I just want to clarify that areas for development are not proposals for improvement. This was a process where we tried to stretch people's thinking about how they could deliver the 5 ways of working, and to really be quite creative and honest about what they could potentially do. When we moved on to the actions that the council is planning to take, these are the priorities that they thought that they could achieve and that they should move forward with. That's not saying that the other stuff won't be done at any one particular stage, but we were trying to get the thought processes going around the 5 ways of working, what it means, and what action you might want to take. So they're not a long list of proposals for improvement. They're just areas for development against the 5 ways of working.
I feel that's where it's useful talking to the public, talk about 5 ways of working. Quite often there are members of the public who have got some good ideas that never come forward, who actually know the practical problems and the issues that we've got because we haven't got a decent transport system, whereby if you cannot provide your own transport, you will not avail yourself of that health service. It's as bad as that. And I think when we don't talk openly with the public and say, come on, let's have your ideas, let's have your suggestions, let's talking. You talk so well, Matt, at the back. So very well, so very technical. I'm completely lost. You need a system for people to live decent lives in Monmouth, whether it's 5 ways, 6 ways, 2 or 3. Talk to the public, listen to them, and let's, for goodness sake, get some system going. There was a system in England some years ago, a token system. The Welsh Government wouldn't countenance that. It was a method of giving financial tokens, which people could use in rural areas as to how they wanted to. They used them in whatever way was appropriate for them. This sort of thing has never been tried or thought about. We're now talking here, one of the ways is your volunteer drivers. There's a limit to what you can expect from volunteers. We need to look at the form of transport that we use, the grassroots bus. I was there at its inception. It's a wonderful service, but is it the right one for going to get Mr. Brown way up the mountain when a small vehicle would do and be far less expensive? So we've got to move it forward, Chairman. We truly, truly have, because there are some dreadfully unhappy, lonely people in the community. So it's still very strongly.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. That's a good contribution. Councillor Watkins, isn't it? Was that helpful, that response to your question?
Yes, I think like Councillor Smith, I am genuinely concerned about the actual delivery of some transport in the area, and I really do care. I want us to move forward quickly. We've declared a climate emergency. We need to get more passenger transport rather than insisting that everyone actually goes in a car. So I appreciate the piece of work wasn't designed to to move ahead of this particular objective. It was to examine the Future Generations Act and the ways of working with that. But I would really like us to have some quicker movement on actually trying to provide these services for our residents. So hence my question. But I'll bring it up in another forum.
Well, I'm sure that officers and any cabinet members present will be picking up on these comments as they're being made. So thank you very much for everybody for all your contributions. I think I'll just note that we've had this presentation and some responses. We've discussed it and we've noted it, and I think that's the issue for the committee. So thank you very much, everyone. Next item on the agenda would be the forward work plan, which I don't think there's anything particular, unless anyone wants to make a comment on the future work plan at this stage. Okay, so we have the minutes of the previous meeting to look at. Does anyone want to? Anyone need to make any comments on that?
To confirm that we accept, or propose we accept them, Mr. Chairman.
Can we have a second? Okay, so we accept the minutes as an accurate record. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'll confirm the date of the next meeting is the 25th of July. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I won't be able to be present for that meeting, so I'm going to ask the newly appointed Vice Chair if he'll take the meeting. I also think this might be the last appearance from some of our WAO colleagues at this meeting. Is that right? Yeah. So we have some new faces next time. I'll close the meeting down now. I don't know whether any more discussion is